I never expected betrayal to feel quiet. People always describe it as a punch to the gut, a storm ripping through your life, or a violent shattering explosion. Hey everyone, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Now let's start today's story. Something loud enough and wild enough to mirror the cruelty behind it. But when my father looked at me from across the long mahogany table, fingers laced tightly together, jaw rigid like carved stone, his voice was so soft it almost sounded tender. Almost. "Ethan," he said, barely above a whisper, "I'm removing you from my will. Effective immediately." The room didn't shake. The chandelier didn't flicker. The walls didn't close in, and the world didn't tilt off its axis. Instead, everything simply paused. It was like someone had pressed a finger against the pulse of time and held it there. I stared at him, waiting, hoping for the joke, for the curve of his lips that used to soften his whole face, for the warmth that once lived in his eyes on the best days of my childhood. But nothing came. All I saw was a coldness so polished, so deliberate, it looked practiced. "Why?" I finally managed. The words scraped up my throat like glass, thin and fragile. He didn't blink. "Because you're not my biological son." My heart didn't just sink. It plummeted. For a moment, it didn't beat at all, then slammed back to life so violently that the chair beneath me screeched against the hardwood floor. My mother sucked in a sharp breath beside me, her shoulders shaking. "Daniel, stop!" she whispered harshly, her voice trembling. "Not like this, please." But my father didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking, unwavering, merciless. I felt myself shrinking under that stare. Shrinking back into the version of myself I thought I had outgrown. The boy who used to stand in doorways, waiting for my father to notice me, to say he was proud. But now there was no pride left in him to give, only disgust and certainty. "You're lying." The words came out thin, shaky, almost childish. "You're lying, Dad." He slid a folder across the table toward me. Not thrown, not shoved in anger, just pushed, calmly, methodically. Like he had rehearsed this moment, over and over again, until it no longer hurt him. My hand trembled as I reached for it, but the leather felt like ice. I pulled it open, and the sight inside sucked the air from my lungs. A DNA report, with my full name printed at the top. And at the bottom, a result that felt like a bullet tearing through the last 22 years of my life. 0% paternal match. My throat dried instantly. Where did this come from?" "From me," he said. "From my doctor. I ran the test last month." Then, like it was nothing, he added, "Twice, in case the first one was wrong." My mother's face collapsed. "You did what?" Her voice was breaking, unraveling. She turned toward him as if she couldn't believe the man in front of her was the same man she married. He ignored her again, complete, deliberate disregard. My mind thrashed desperately between disbelief and denial. My father, who taught me how to ride a bike, who carried me on his shoulders at the fair, who clapped the loudest at my school plays, even when he came home exhausted from work, was telling me I wasn't his, that none of it mattered, that I wasn't part of his future, that the love he gave me all those years was not enough, not strong enough, to override a piece of paper. "Dad," I whispered, my voice cracking at the edges. "I'm your son." "No," he said sharply. "You're her son." My mother broke then. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stood abruptly, gripping the edge of the table, as though the ground might give way beneath her. She leaned toward him, her voice shaking. "How dare you? How dare you say that? You think I would ever— I know exactly what I think, he snapped, cutting her off. The softness was gone now, completely stripped away. What replaced it was rage, hot, sharp, and vicious. A rage I had seen building for months. The late-night arguments he tried to hide, the distant stares, the sudden coldness he directed at me for reasons he never explained. Now it all made sense. At least it made sense to him. You cheated, he said, and I'm done pretending this boy belongs to me. Boy, not son. The single word slammed into me harder than any insult he had ever thrown. I didn't even realize I had stood up until the chair scraped again, echoing in the suffocating silence. So that's it? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. You just throw me away? 22 years and I'm nothing to you? His lips tightened into a line so thin it looked painful. You have no claim over my estate. Not now. Not ever. My mother cried openly now, her hands shaking as she covered her face. But my father didn't look at her. He didn't look at either of us. It was as if he had already emotionally amputated the parts of his life he deemed unnecessary. And I was one of them. I walked out. Not because I wanted to, not because I was brave enough to face the truth, but because if I stayed 1 second longer, if I looked at him again, something inside me would have shattered beyond repair. The front door opened with a long groan, as if even the house itself hated what was happening inside. When I stepped onto the porch, the late afternoon sky felt too heavy, too gray. The clouds hung low like they were eavesdropping, waiting to swallow whatever remained of my world. The air was cold enough to sting, but not cold enough to numb the burn searing through my chest. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to think. I only knew one thing with painful clarity. My father had chosen to believe a test result over 22 years of love, memories, and shared life. He had chosen numbers over me. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly imagine, was that the DNA report was only half the story. And the secret my father feared most wasn't written in that folder. It was buried somewhere darker, somewhere deeper, something he hoped would stay hidden forever, until I uncovered it and made him regret everything he had done. I didn't go home that night. I wandered aimlessly through the winding streets of the city, moving without direction, as if walking could somehow outrun the ache tightening around my ribcage. The sun dipped below the rooftops, bleeding the sky into a muted violet. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Tiny, lonely beacons in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar, colder, and far more fragile than I had ever realized. I kept walking until my legs throbbed, and my thoughts felt loud enough to split my skull open. Eventually, I ended up outside the one place that had always felt safe when everything else fell apart, Lucas's apartment. Lucas and I had grown up together. We shared scraped knees, shared secrets, and 1,000 moments of whispered plans about futures we weren't sure we would ever reach. There was no one else I could face that night. When he opened the door, he didn't greet me with his usual sarcastic remark or grin. The second he saw my face, pale, hollow, trembling, his expression softened instantly. No questions, no judgment. He simply stepped aside. "Come in," he murmured. I collapsed onto his couch like every bone in my body had turned to dust. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, numb and rigid, staring at nothing. The room hummed softly with the sound of the fridge and distant city noise. Lucas didn't push, didn't prod. He just sat nearby in silence until almost an hour had passed. Finally, he spoke. "What happened?" "The dam cracked." I told him everything. Every word my father said, the DNA test, the will, the way Mom had fallen apart beside me. I repeated the phrases that had sliced into me like a blade. "You are not my biological son. You have no claim to my estate." When I finished, Lucas let out a long, low exhale. "Ethan, damn. Man, I'm really, really sorry." He ran a hand through his hair. "But something about this feels off." "I know." I leaned back, pressing a hand against my chest, as if I could calm the storm inside. My dad would never do something like this. Not before, but over the past year, it's like he's changed. Lucas frowned thoughtfully. People don't change like that without a reason. His words hit me harder than I expected, because deep down, I had felt it too. There had been a reason, one I couldn't understand at the time. Over the past year, my father had drifted into someone unrecognizable. He grew distant, withdrawn, suspicious of everyone around him. He snapped at my mom over things he used to shrug off. He locked himself in his study for hours. Sometimes I'd find him staring into space, like he was wrestling with something he couldn't control. I thought it was stress, work, age, anything except this. But now, knowing what he'd done, knowing the secret he believed he was uncovering, it all felt darker, more deliberate, almost desperate. I barely slept that night. By the time dawn bled pale light across the apartment ceiling, my mind felt frayed at the edges. That's when my phone rang. "Mom." Her voice was wrecked, thin and trembling. "Ethan, please come home. We need to talk." For a moment, pride made me want to say no, to protect myself from another wound. But then I heard it, the quiet, fragile tremor beneath her words, and that alone shattered my resistance. "I'm coming," I whispered. When I reached the house, the air inside felt heavy, like grief had seeped into the walls. Mom sat in the living room, a mug clutched between shaking hands. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks blotchy. "Your father left early," she said quietly. "He said he had business." There was an edge of fear in her voice. Not sadness. Fear. She looked up at me, tears shining. "Ethan, you need to know something." My heart lurched painfully, expecting, hoping for an explanation. But instead of speaking, she stood and motioned for me to follow. She led me upstairs, past the photos on the wall, past my father's locked study, up toward the attic. The wooden steps groaned beneath our weight as we climbed. Dust floated in thin beams of morning light, swirling around us like ghosts of forgotten memories. The attic smelled like old books, cardboard, and years no one wanted to remember. Mom crossed to a stack of boxes in the corner. Her hands trembled as she dug through them with frantic urgency. "Your father thinks I'm hiding something," she whispered hoarsely. "But he's the one hiding something from you." Her words made my stomach twist into knots. After a few tense minutes, she pulled out a small, thick manila envelope tied with a frayed string. She held it the way someone might hold something poisonous or sacred, or both. "This," she said, voice barely above a breath, "is what he's terrified you'll find." My pulse thundered in my ears. "What is it?" I asked. She placed the envelope in my hands. Her fingers lingered for a moment, as if letting go frightened her. "Open it." Inside were 3 items: a birth certificate, a photograph of my father, much younger, standing beside a woman I had never seen, and a handwritten letter addressed to me, dated 22 years ago. My vision blurred at the edges. My throat tightened. The photograph drew my attention first. My father stood. I barely slept that night. Every time I let my eyelids fall, the same images replayed in flashes. Sharp, vivid, relentless. The photograph of my father with that woman. The soft curve of her pregnant belly. The way he held her with a tenderness I had never seen him show anyone in years. The birth certificate, with its mismatched dates and unfamiliar handwriting, twisted my stomach into knots. But nothing haunted me more than the letter. You have a son. 3 words. 3 words that didn't just rewrite my life. They obliterated the version of it I had spent 22 years believing in. They cut through the foundation of everything I thought I understood. They whispered truths that had been kept buried deeper than any lie should ever go. By the time the first traces of dawn crept in, brushing faint gold along the ceiling, I felt hollow, like someone had scraped out the inside of me with cold metal and left only an empty shell behind. Mom made coffee after a long, sleepless silence, her hands trembling slightly as she poured it into 2 mismatched mugs. But the cups just sat on the table between us, untouched, growing colder with each passing minute. Neither of us could bring ourselves to take even a sip. Eventually, the front door slammed downstairs. We both flinched. Dad was home. Mom straightened, panic flaring in her eyes. For a second, she looked like she might be sick. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, "go to your room. Let me talk to him first, please." No. My voice surprised even me, quiet but steady, like iron beneath water. "I'm done hiding." Heavy footsteps climbed the staircase, growing louder and faster. Dad appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, shoulders rigid, tension radiating off him like heat from asphalt on a summer day. His eyes were sharp, dark, and stormy. "Where were you?" he demanded, voice slicing through the room. Mom didn't answer. His gaze snapped to me. "And you? Here to collect more pity?" I rose slowly from the chair. "We need to talk." He gave a single sharp laugh, cold, humorless. "We have nothing to talk about." Without speaking, I placed the envelope on the table between us. His reaction was instant. All color drained from his face. His pupils constricted. His jaw tightened so hard I thought it might crack. It was the expression of someone whose worst fear had suddenly materialized right in front of him. He reached out for the envelope, but I slid it just out of his grasp. "You already knew I wasn't biologically yours," I said quietly. "You've known since the day I was born." His throat bobbed. "You shouldn't have found that." "No," I snapped, heat rising in my chest. "You shouldn't have lied." The silence that followed was suffocating. Thick, heavy, charged with a tension that made the air feel unbreathable. Dad's shoulders drooped just slightly, like the weight of the years was finally pressing down on him. But beneath that small collapse was something far more dangerous. Anger, frustration, fear boiling under the surface. "This is complicated," he muttered. "Actually," I said, voice steady despite the quake inside me, "it's not. You lied to Mom. You lied to me. You lied to everyone." Mom's voice finally broke through, soft but cracking at the edges. "Daniel, why? Why are you doing this now? Why push him away after 22 years? Why the sudden DNA test?" Dad's expression hardened like stone. "I didn't have a choice." "Yes," I fired back, "you did." He began pacing, rubbing his forehead with frantic, jerky movements. "Someone contacted me, someone who knows about Anna." My pulse spiked. Mom inhaled sharply, horrified. "Who?" Dad didn't immediately answer. He stared toward the window, like he expected someone, anyone, to be standing outside, watching us. "He wants money," Dad said finally, voice low and defeated. "A lot of it. And he said if I don't pay, he'll destroy me." My company, my reputation, everything I've worked for. Who? I insisted. Dad slowly turned. When our eyes met, something raw and haunted flickered inside his. Her brother. My stomach twisted painfully. He found the old letters, Dad continued, voice unsteady. He found the hospital records. And now he's threatening to expose me for abandoning her. Abandoning both of you. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes again, different from yesterday's tears. Those weren't just tears of heartbreak. They were tears of realization. I felt something burning under my ribs. Rage, disbelief, betrayal tangled together like razor wire. Dad sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. He said if I didn't pay, he would go directly to you. Tell you everything. So I tried to get ahead of it. By erasing me from your life? I whispered, voice trembling with hurt so deep it felt physical. A flicker of shame passed through his eyes, real, human shame, but it vanished almost as quickly as it came. By protecting us, he insisted. No, my voice broke. By trying to bury the truth again. He didn't deny it. Mom stepped toward him slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. Daniel, what happened to her? To Anna? Dad's breath hitched. He looked away. She left, he said quietly. She didn't want anything to do with me after I ended things. That's not what the letter says, I said sharply. His eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time, I saw real fear there. She didn't leave, he said, voice barely audible. She died. The room went still, silent, cold. My heart hammered hard enough to hurt. Died? He nodded, a stiff, brittle movement. Childbirth complications. A few months after she wrote me. I didn't find out until later. Mom let out a strangled gasp. Oh my God! Dad ran a shaking hand through his hair. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I thought people would blame me. I blamed myself. I married your mother and tried to start fresh. I wanted you to have a stable home. I wanted to give you everything I could. But the guilt, it never went away. Tears stung my eyes, unwelcome and burning. Hurt and compassion warred violently inside me, but I didn't know which one I hated more. Mom stepped beside me. Her hand found my shoulder. Dad looked up at her, broken. If you knew the truth, you'd know I was the reason she died. The words shattered something inside the room, something fragile and unspoken. But I wasn't done. Why the DNA test? I asked again, voice low, steady, cold. Dad looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face. Utter defeat. Because if I could prove you weren't mine, her brother would have nothing to blackmail me with. It was like being stabbed, repeatedly. He had tried to erase me, to sever the bond we had, for the sake of his own survival. My father, the man I had adored, trusted, defended, had chosen himself over me. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. If he wanted to bury the truth, I would dig it up, every last piece of it. The next morning, a strange stillness settled over the house. It wasn't peace. It wasn't calm. It was the heavy quiet that follows a storm, but promises another one is already on the horizon. I woke with the kind of clarity that felt almost unnatural, as though the night had stripped away every layer of denial I had ever clung to. No more half-truths, no more secrets, no more letting my father decide what parts of my life were acceptable or important. I was done playing the role he had written for me. If he was being blackmailed, there had to be traces, documents, messages, threats, something tangible that would explain everything he had tried to hide. And I had a feeling I knew exactly where he kept the things he didn't want anyone to see. His study. The room had always felt forbidden growing up, a place we weren't allowed to linger in or even touch without permission. Dad treated it like a sanctuary. Locked drawers, files labeled in codes only he understood, and an aura of cold authority. But today, that aura meant nothing. Mom stood near the stairs when she saw me walking toward the study door. Her hand hovered near my arm, trembling slightly. "Ethan, maybe we should wait. He might—" "No," I said gently but firmly. "He's kept the truth from me my whole life. I'm done waiting." She didn't stop me. The doorknob felt cold under my palm as I twisted it. The hinges groaned, releasing a smell that immediately transported me back to childhood. Old whiskey, leather-bound books, the metallic tang of ink from his fountain pens. The blinds were half drawn, cutting the morning sunlight into harsh, uneven stripes across the desk and casting the room in a fractured glow. Every drawer on the desk was locked, but Dad, for all his paranoia, was still predictable. He always kept the spare keys in the same place, tucked inside a hollowed-out dictionary on the top shelf. That dictionary had probably fooled everyone else, but I'd watched him retrieve keys from it when I was 13 and trying to borrow a pen from the study. He never knew I'd seen. I reached for it now, opened the fake pages, and retrieved the small ring of keys. The first drawer clicked open. Receipts, bills, a couple of old photographs, including one of me at 10 years old with a missing front tooth. Completely normal things, completely irrelevant. I moved to the second drawer. This one felt heavier, figuratively and literally. Inside were several thick folders marked with red ink. Confidential, personal, do not discard private correspondence. My heartbeat thudded, heavy and uneven. Something in my chest tightened, like my body knew this drawer contained the truth before I even touched the files. The first folder I opened froze me in place. Letters, dozens of them, all written in the same angled handwriting, all addressed to my father, all from him, Anna's brother. Most of the letters were vicious, full of threats, demands for money, descriptions of what he'd do if Dad didn't cooperate. Words like justice, debt, and blood repeated over and over. One letter ended with, "You took everything from her. I'm going to take everything from you." My skin crawled, but then I found something different. One envelope was thicker than the rest, sealed with tape instead of glue. Inside was a document I didn't expect, a police report, dated the night Anna went into labor. My eyes skimmed the first line. Woman brought in unconscious. Severe internal bleeding. My stomach dropped. The next line, no partner present. My pulse quickened. The third, witness reports a violent argument earlier that night. I felt like the floor tilted under me. Then the last line, the one that hit like a punch to the ribs. Suspected cause, blunt force trauma. Blunt force trauma, not a fall, not an accident, not a tragic medical complication. Trauma. Mom stood behind me, voice shaking. Ethan, what is that?" I handed her the report. Her eyes widened, her face draining of color. "Your father told me she fell," Mom whispered. "He said she slipped. He said he tried to help her, but she refused treatment." But the report said nothing of the sort. It didn't describe an accident. It described violence. Suddenly, my father's desperation, his fear, his need to erase history, it all snapped together with sickening clarity. He wasn't afraid of rumors. He wasn't afraid of a scandal. He was terrified the truth would rise to the surface. My hands trembled as I dug into the bottom drawer, a drawer with an extra lock Dad rarely used. The metal gave a soft click. revealing a small black flash drive tucked neatly inside. I took it out, plugged it into Dad's computer, and waited. Only one file appeared, a video. I hesitated for just a breath, one heartbeat where I knew everything was about to change. Then I pressed play. The screen flickered before stabilizing. The camera angle was slightly crooked, the lighting dim, but the moment her face appeared, everything inside me went still. Anna. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair tied back hastily, breath unsteady. She kept swallowing like she was fighting nausea or fear. "If anything happens to me," she whispered, staring straight into the lens, "I need people to know the truth." Mom let out a broken sound beside me. Anna's eyes watered, but she forced herself to continue. "Daniel got angry when I told him I was pregnant. He said it would ruin his life. He said I trapped him." My chest tightened. She took a shaky breath. "He pushed me." The words cracked something inside me, something I couldn't piece back together even if I tried. I hit the table, hard. "The doctor says the baby might be okay, but I'm scared. I'm so scared." Her voice broke into sobs. Mom pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming silently. At the end of the video, Anna leaned closer to the camera, her expression heartbreaking. "If something happens, please let my child know I loved him. I didn't leave him. I never would." The screen went black. Silence, heavy, suffocating, lethal, filled the room. Mom leaned against the wall, whispering, He told me she died peacefully, that she forgave him, that it wasn't his fault." My throat tightened. He lied. Dad hadn't just hidden the truth. He hadn't just run from guilt. He had buried the woman who gave me life. And now someone, her brother, was dragging the truth back to the surface. But the world didn't know yet. Only we did. And that meant something important. I had the power to decide what happened next. I waited until Dad came home. The house felt hollow, emptier than I had ever felt it, its silence stretching tight across the walls like an old wound being forced open. Every tick of the hallway clock seemed unnaturally loud, each one landing like a quiet accusation. When the front door opened, I heard it in a way I never had before. The soft scrape of the key, the low groan of the hinge, and then the tired exhale of the man stepping inside. His footsteps traveled through the entrance, slow, dragging, as if he already sensed the weight of something waiting for him. As if he knew, on some instinctive level, that the foundation of his carefully crafted world had finally cracked. Mom remained upstairs. She couldn't bear to face him after what she had seen. I didn't blame her. I barely felt steady enough to stay in the same house. But I was done hiding. I sat in his study, the room where he made all his decisions, where he planned the life he thought we should all live. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated the mess I had created, a carefully laid out battlefield of truth. On the computer screen, the video remained paused on the last frame. Anna's face, pale and tear-streaked, eyes wide with fear and hope. Beside the keyboard lay the stack of threat letters, the police report, the photocopied medical entries. On the desk, I had placed the one surviving picture of her, my biological mother, so he would see it the second he walked in. When Dad entered the study, he stopped dead in the doorway. His face drained of color so fast, it was like watching blood retreat from a wound. "Ethan." His voice cracked on my name. "Please, don't do this." I stood slowly, feeling a steadiness inside me I had never known until this moment. "No, Dad," I said. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore." He took one hesitant step forward. You don't understand. No. My voice came out sharper, firmer than I expected. For once, you listen. I pointed at the monitor. I saw everything you've kept from me for 22 years. He closed his eyes, like the truth itself was blinding. She wasn't supposed to. He stopped, breath shuddering. It was an argument. I didn't mean to push her that hard. She lost her balance. She fell. That's not what the police report says. He flinched visibly. And it's not what she says. I tapped the screen. She recorded that video because she was scared of you. He sagged into the nearest chair, elbows on his knees, hands cupping his head. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. When he finally lifted his face, his eyes were rimmed red. I know what it looks like, he whispered. I know what I did, and I've lived with it every single day. I wanted to feel something, anger, grief, disgust, pity, but all I felt was a cold sort of clarity. Then why lie to us, I asked. Because I thought... His breath hitched. If I raised you well, if I gave you everything, maybe God would forgive me. Maybe life would forgive me. The room felt tight, suffocating. Is that why you erased me from your will? I demanded. That wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting yourself. He didn't deny it. I thought if there was no legal tie between us, he murmured, no one could connect me to her. To what happened? Her brother. He threatened to expose everything. If this goes public, I lose my company, my marriage, my reputation, everything I have ever built. I could go to jail. I studied him, this man who had raised me with gentle hands and strict rules, who had been my hero, my anchor. Now he looked small, broken, stripped of every illusion he had ever wrapped himself in. I'm not here to ruin you, I said softly. I came here because I needed the truth, and because I need to decide what I'm going to do with it. Dad's voice trembled. Ethan, please, don't destroy me. I took a slow breath, letting the quiet stretch long enough for him to feel it. I won't. He collapsed back in the chair with a sob of relief. But, I continued, stepping closer, I'm not protecting you for free. His head jerked up, eyes wide with fear. Tell me what you want. You're going to do 3 things, I said, or I release everything. His jaw clenched. Name them. First, you put my name back in the will. Not because I need your money. I don't. But because you need to fix the damage you caused by cutting me out of your life on paper. He nodded quickly, almost desperately. Done. Second, you go to therapy. Real therapy. Not the masking, not the whiskey, not the pretending to be fine routine. You face what you did, and you stop hiding behind the life you built. His shoulders slumped, but after a moment he nodded again. And third, I said, my voice dropping to something colder, you tell Mom everything, yourself, every detail, every lie, every truth you buried. If she leaves, that's her choice, but you don't get to manipulate her anymore. A long silence. Dad swallowed hard. I'll tell her. Tonight, I specified. He closed his eyes in defeat. Tonight. I picked up the thick envelope, the one with the police report, the letters, the document that shattered decades of deception. I'm keeping this, I said, as insurance. You won't leak it? His voice broke on the question. No, I said, because I'm not you. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed, shoulders shaking violently. I turned toward the door, but before I stepped out, something made me pause. I looked back at him, the man I had idolized, feared, admired, and never fully understood until tonight. Dad? His head lifted slowly. I may not be your son by blood, I said quietly, But I was yours in every way that mattered, and you destroyed that long before I ever learned the truth. The words hit him harder than any threat could. Then I walked away. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I left that room not as the boy desperate for his father's approval, but as the man who finally held the truth. The truth he feared. The truth he tried to bury. The truth that now gave me the power he had stolen from me my entire life. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories like this. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.